Hey there everybody, it's Mike DiLisio, and today I'm going to be reviewing Newsboys from designer Sashi and publisher Sashi and Sashi. Newsboys is a roll and flip and write game, which is a little twist, themed around being newsboys in the late 19th century in Brooklyn, New York. What you're trying to do is expand your sales area so that you can make the most money from having increased customers, while at the same time fighting for workers' rights and better working conditions. So let's head over to the table. I'll give you a quick rundown of how the game plays, and we'll come back here and I will let you know what I think. All right, here we see a game of Newsboys all set up. Each player is going to have their own player board, 3 dice, and a pen, and you're going to have a common stack of cards right there. This is a roll and flip and write game. So a little twist to some familiar formulas. And these player boards are the same as far as the makeup of the number of hexes in the particular places, but the colors are different. So you can see in the upper left here, you've got the pink there and blue there, and the color distribution is the same, but in different places. And you've got 4 different boards because this plays up to 4 players. And the back of each of these boards has the solo game as well. All right, so there are 4 multiplayer boards and 4 solo boards. In the game, you're going to go through a series of rounds that have 5 phases, okay? And I'll just show you each of those phases in time. The first thing that you're going to do is one player is going to reveal a new icon card, all right? So that means that they're going to take the top card and flip it over. So you've got a number of symbols here, and these symbols apply to the different types of buildings that you've got. So blue are offices, the yellow are homes, the brown are schools, the green are factories, and the pink are shops. And so you have available to every player these 3 icons at the beginning of the round. However, also every player is going to roll their 3 dice and add them to that collective pool of icons. So let's say both of these players roll their dice and they get this. Okay. So what this says is that player on the left here, you choose one icon. So they can either choose the yellow and they'd have 2 there. They can choose the brown, they'd have 2 there. They can choose the pink, they'd have 1 there. And you see this question mark was rolled. This is a separate result that can count for any icon that is not represented here. So this could be blue because there's no blue here. It could be green because there's no green here. All right. But it would only be 1 of that particular icon. So if I had rolled 2 question marks, it could have been 2 of the green, 2 of the blue. Also, at any point, you can, or at the point that you roll the dice, you could choose to re-roll any or none of your dice. So let's say maybe I wanted to get another yellow, I wanted to try for it, or maybe another brown. I would go ahead and re-roll this dice. I got a green, it didn't really help me there. This player might re-roll both of these to see if they can get more brown. And they did not, okay? So that's phase 1, phase 1 was flipping the card. Phase 2 is rolling the dice and re-rolling if you choose to. And then phase 3 is marking your boards, all right? And so what you have to do, as I mentioned, is choose 1 icon. So let's say that this player is going to choose yellow. There are some rules as to where you can mark on your boards. You have to mark next to a place that has already been X'd out. So at the beginning of the game, you have to mark into one of these spaces outside of that X. The rules also will state that you cannot split up blocks. So I have those 2 yellows. I couldn't put 1 here, and let's say I had an X there to make this a valid spot. I couldn't put 1 here and 1 here. You can't split them. They all have to go into the same block. You can choose a block that you can't fill up. So let's say that I had an X here and I wanted to place into here. It's perfectly fine to just cross off the 2 X's and leave that for another turn. You also can have more icons than you have spots in your block. The carryover there is just lost. You don't get to save it for another round or anything, okay? So the last thing to mention is that in each of these blocks, they've got an icon of the corresponding building. That always has to be the last hex in the block to be crossed off. So I choose yellow. I'm going to cross off this, and I actually finish off that block, and I'll talk to you how that works in a moment. This player is going to choose the 3 brown, and their only option is right here, okay, because that's the only brown that is adjacent to that hex. So, marking the boards, all right? At this point, also, if you have filled up a block like I have here, you will circle the corresponding color bonus, okay? Because I filled up a yellow block right there, I go ahead and circle that spot. Another thing that's going to happen is I get what is called a referral bonus. What a referral bonus is if you have the exact number of icons that you need to close out that block, you get a chance to mark anywhere else that would be a valid spot, which would either be any spot that's adjacent to any of these 3 X's that have been done, or in your strike gauge here. So let's say I marked one off on my strike gauge, and I will talk to you about what that is in a moment, okay? So referral bonuses can actually chain up. If you had a number of places where you had all but the last icon marked, you could just chain, mark these off, and get some nice little combos going there. So in this case, this player did not have the exact number. They had 3, so they're not going to get a referral bonus at that point. The second to last phase is phase 4, and this is if you had gotten any of the bonuses, the column, area, or color bonuses. You would state that to the other players because those have a bit of a race to them. All right, so let's just talk about those bonuses really quickly. A column is when you have filled all of the icons in a particular column. All right. Only the second, third, and fourth columns give you a bonus. So the first person or persons to fill out the second column will get 3 points. Everyone after will get 1 point. Third column, same thing, except the number of points are different. You also notice these little symbols down here. Those trigger what are called paydays, and I will talk about that in a moment. All right, your area bonuses are right here, and that's when you have filled up completely. You see the little dotted lines to denote the 4 different areas, and the first person or persons to do that will get the higher value here, where everyone else will get the lower value. So everyone can achieve all these bonuses, but only the first player or players will get the high number. I'm saying players because if there's a tie, it happens at the same round, both players will get the high value and everyone else will get the lower value for those. Okay, and the last bonus is the color bonus, and that is if you go across, if you get like 5 yellow first, you'll get 3, everyone else would get 2. This is also a potential end game condition, is if a player achieves 2 of the color bonuses, that would trigger the end of the game. The other way that you can trigger the end of the game is at the beginning of the game, you shuffle this deck of cards and you put this end card in the second to last spot. So basically going through this deck would be the other end game trigger. Okay, so that's the 5 phases of the game. Let's talk a little bit about this strike track and the paydays. Okay, so in this game, what you're doing is you're trying to both expand your sales area as Newsboys, but you're also trying to fight for higher wages and better working conditions. And that's by marking off this strike gauge. All right, so as I mentioned, anytime you are filling, or if I didn't mention, I'll mention it now. Anytime you choose an icon, you can go instead of into your main area, into your strike gauge. So let's say we went to the next round, flip this over, I roll, I see 3 of those. So I'm actually going to try to re-roll these and get more of those. I did not. This player could roll as well. Let's say they chose to re-roll also. Okay, now at this point, I could choose those 3 icons. They could be anything it doesn't represent here. In this case, it's not going to matter as long as there is a valid one, which in case there is here, you got green, you've got blue that aren't showing up, you've got yellow. You can go ahead and mark that number into your strike gauge, okay? And so you're going to be going from left to right, marking these off. These are going to be corresponding to money spots and the 3 paydays that you will potentially have in the game. You'll always have a final payday. You are pretty much going to always have a star payday. You may have a diamond payday. All right. When you mark off a icon that has this little dollar sign next to it here, every time you do that, you're going to mark off, starting from the left, one of these little dollar sign points. Okay? And when the paydays happen, which is when, as I said again, you fill up these columns, the first player to do it is going to trigger a payday, but everyone will have that payday. And so for the first one, what you would do is you would see how many you've marked off here, which is going to be the maximum you could score on that payday. So in this case, it would be 5. That's a terrible 5, but I'm doing this on camera, so give me a little bit of grace there. Let's say that's a little better 5, okay? So that's the max. But the actual points you're going to get are the highest crossed off gray number here. So let's say I had done this throughout this series of rounds, but that's where I was when the payday was triggered. 5 is my maximum, but I only crossed off up to 3. So the actual points I would receive for that payday is 3. And it'll be the same thing for the other 2 paydays. It's going to be however far you've marked along your strike gauge compared to the number of money spots that you have accessed throughout the game. All right? You're going to continue to do this until one of the endgame triggers are reached, which, as I said, is going to be 2 of these color bonuses done, or you get through the deck, and then you're going to add up all your points. All right? You're going to get points for any color bonuses. You're going to get points for any column bonuses. You'll add those up and put those here. You'll get points for any paydays. There will always be a final payday that is done at the end of the game. You'll add up any of the points you have here. That goes there. You will get your area bonuses if acquired and put those there. Total those all up to get your total there. And that is how you play Newsboys. All right, so there you see Newsboys, and you can see how just changing up the idea of a flipping right and a rolling right and combining them together takes some, familiar ideas and just puts a little subtle twist on it. The other thing I wanted to mention is that Newsboys is what is going to be considered the second in the line of Sashi and Sashi dice games. That's why you see the number 2 there. The first one was Let's Make a Bus Route the Dice Game. So it's in basically the same size box, and it's a similar type game in that it's a dry erase boards with dry erase pens. You're rolling dice and you're marking them, and there are cards involved in that game as well. So Newsboys is the second title released by this publisher, Sashi and Sashi, in a relatively short period of time. I don't know that I've noticed that happening before, where you have 2 games that are so closely released next to each other. And it's interesting because while the first game is called Come Sail Away, and I reviewed that on the channel, it's the biggest box that this publisher has ever put out. And I'm mentioning that for a particular purpose. It's a big box and a relatively light game, all right? So sometimes, people think the bigger the box, the more complex the game is going to be. Well, in this case, that's not the case. I think Newsboys is a more complex game than Come Sail Away is. Is it one of the most complex roll, flip, right type games I've played before? No, not by a long shot. But there is certainly more to consider in this game. So, let's talk about a couple of things as far as usability wise. I feel like this was a lot of information to get on a relatively small board. I think they were largely successful in getting that information across, with a couple of things that I think I wish was a little bit better. The little dollar signs on those particular icons are very, very small, and it's not necessarily that you're not going to see them. It's that they're small enough that it could be easy to forget, right? It's not a very prominent thing where you go, oh, okay, yeah, I need to mark that little spot off on the dollar signs. I have noticed that players can forget to mark those, and that will definitely affect the points you're scoring during paydays and such. So that's one thing I wish there was a slight difference on that. And the only other thing is those dollar signs that I was mentioning, the circles for the little dollar signs are very, very tiny. This sounds really nitpicky. I think they recommend you circle them. I think it works better if you X them out, because trying to circle those little things can be a little bit difficult to do. But those are relatively small. Overall, I think that the components for the game, and this is kind of related to that, and the art is very nice. The player boards are good. Now, they're not nearly as thick as the player boards in Let's Make a Bus Route, the dice game. Perhaps that's because there are more boards in this game. You know, each person gets their own. But they are significantly thinner than the boards in Let's Make a Bus Route, the dice game. But they're still very functional, and I do like that they are all unique in the color, what colors are where, and that they each have a solo board that's also slightly different in which colors are where. The dice are perfectly fine, and the cards are good quality. The pens, you know, they're dry erase pens. They work fine, but you can always get more if they ever run out. The rule book is solid. There's, again, a fair amount of information to give out to people, and so I think that they handled it well. They described with good explanations in detail how to play the game. I have a feeling it might be a little daunting for some players who, you know, see a relatively small box roll and write type game, and they see the rule book and they're like, whoa, there's quite a bit of rules here. But once you get it, it's not very difficult. It's not difficult to necessarily teach or learn. I think it is, you know, commensurate with many of the roll and write games. Not on the light end, not on the heavy end. Kind of right there in that middle spot. I like the fact that this has some familiarity to it. The game definitely has some familiar things. You're trying to chain bonuses to get combos. You're trying to, you know, fill areas. You're kind of racing for different goals that you're trying to achieve. So all of that is familiar, but there are little twists that kind of make it stand apart a bit, and which is important because this is such a crowded genre right now. It doesn't seem to be slowing down anytime soon, and so you usually have to have something to kind of set yourself apart. And so that roll and write combined with the flip and write is a nice little thing. Also, I really do like this kind of, you have competing priorities that you have to deal with, okay? Because you definitely, I feel like most people are going to play and have their focus on that top part of the board where you're filling out the areas. That seems to be a primary concern. And maybe the strike gauge is a secondary. It's like, okay, I don't really have anywhere I want to place on the main board. I mean, I've got a couple of decent options, but nothing great. So I'll just go ahead and throw 2 X's on the strike gauge. That's fine. But I have found that that's not necessarily a good path to victory unless every player is doing exactly that. Because you can really get a lot of points by building up that strike gauge and also marking off the hexes with the little dollar sign. So that's what makes it interesting, is it's not just throw a bunch of icons onto the strike gauge, because that in and of itself isn't getting you any points. It's the combination of that with getting the dollar signs on the board, which is difficult because you can't do both on the same roll. You have to either be going to the top half of your board where you might potentially mark off those spots, or you're going into the strike gauge. So being able to kind of determine when it's best to do either is very, very important, and something that I'm still struggling to get exactly right. But I like it. It's compelling, it's interesting, and it's a slight difference to other types of games that I've played like this. So overall, I think that Newsboys is a lovely little package, a nice production with a couple of little quibbles that I've mentioned. I happen to love the aesthetic for Sashi and Sashi games. Your mileage may vary. You probably know if this is an art style that works for you or not. It's consistent across their line, but it definitely works for me. I like the subtle change to the roll and write, flip and write formula. I also like how quickly the game plays. It is a game that is well, not relatively, it's quite quick for the amount of decisions that you're making. And that's always a positive for me as well. So that being said, I can easily recommend Newsboys. I'm giving it an 8 out of 10, seal of approval. And if you think that this is something that you agree that it's a slight difference from the other roll and rides you've seen, I would absolutely give it a try because there's a lot of them to choose from. So I do think this is one that stands apart a bit. All right, well, that's going to do it for me. This is Mike DiLisio signing off from the Dice Tower Midwest Annex.